One of the core principles of an oppressive regime is its ability to manipulate the people under it. And the best way to accomplish that is through propaganda. And the Fire Nation found one of the perfect ways to use propaganda to influence the masses and paint a very negative picture of its enemies, the Ember Island Players. Now on the surface, these guys just seem like a bunch of incompetent theater kids with half-decent special effects making a show about the gang. But knowing the Fire Nation's proclivity towards propaganda, what with the things that they teach in school.
What year did Firelord Sozin battle the Air Nation army?
The Air Nomads didn't have a formal military.
Dancing is not conducive to a proper learning environment. Young people must have rigid discipline and order.
There's a hidden layer to a bunch of decisions made by the Ember Island Players. So let's take a look at the way they portray other characters, events, and the deeper meanings that could be read from their portrayals. Let's start off with the main character. Aang here is played by a woman, which at first seems like a nothing thing. Women play male roles in theater all the time. Matter of fact, the role of Peter Pan is more often than not played by a woman on stage. But when you consider that the Avatar is meant to be the biggest threat to the Fire Lord, being the one destined to take him down and bring balance to the nations, this portrayal takes on a whole new meaning. The Fire Nation under the rule of Sozin and Ozai aren't necessarily progressive, and while they don't talk down to women or deny them positions of power per se, it's clear that they don't treat them as kindly either. As such, having Aang be portrayed by a woman can be seen as sort of a sissification on their part, dolling up the Avatar and making him look more feminine to ascribe more weakness to him in the eyes of the public. Combine this with altering important events, such as making it seem like Aang was rescued by the Blue Spirit without Aang having to do anything on his part, and reducing his personality to a happy-go-lucky trickster, and it turns the greatest enemy of the state into a farce for the Fire Nation to laugh at. A real get a look at this fucko type. Even with the one time that they portray history somewhat correctly, with the single victory that they've allotted themselves to show with Aang fighting off Admiral Zhao and his army, the actress still makes a fool of herself in order to make Aang look more ridiculous. Not to mention, this single victory that the performance allows Aang is against a man that the Fire Nation would have already deemed as a failure to begin with, not just for losing to a child, but for attempting to shift the balance of nature so badly that it would have serious ramifications for the entire world. It's telling that Ozai and Azula never attempted anything remotely this stupid, showing Zhao's closed-mindedness and a willingness to let this be the one Fire Nation officer Aang is allowed to have an unconditional win over. Now Katara here is a mess. For starters, we have her making constant grandiose speeches about hope.
Every day the world awaits a beacon to guide us, yet none appears. Still, we cannot give up hope, for hope is all we have. And we must never relinquish it, even to our dying breath.
While on the one hand, this is an obvious flanderization of her character, hamming up her most notable traits. On the other hand, these speeches about hope being framed in a more comedic light serves as a lens of how the Fire Nation views the Water Tribe. They're pitiful, they're laughable, they're losers, and combined with their portrayal of Sokka, who's a food-obsessed meathead with no warrior instincts whatsoever, they're weak. Notice how there's only a single instance of waterbending throughout the entire play that we get to see, and it's when Katara breaks Aang from out of the iceberg. Now it's not as if the Ember Island Players don't have the means of portraying waterbending. Their special effects team found ways to portray firebending, airbending, earthbending, and even lightning bending. So the lack of a portrayal of Katara's waterbending skills feels less like a lack of budget and restrictions on their part, and more like a deliberate choice to make Katara seem more meek and useless than she really is. Their choice in costuming should also tell you something about the way they chose to portray Katara. Now I'm no genius, but I'd think if you were living in the South Pole, that's a lot of skin to be showing. Ember Island Katara's outfit shows off her chest and legs more, most likely as fan service for the live audience watching in the theater. But this too has a double meaning when we look at the way Katara's romances are treated. Now the real Katara did catch some feeling for people like Jet or Zuko, but the way these moments are portrayed, it comes across much different. Look at the way Ember Island Jet phrases his promise to wipe out a Fire Nation town.
Don't cry, baby. Jet will wipe out that nasty town for you.
Now look at the face Ember Island Katara makes when he makes said promise. Now look at the way they decide to portray Zuko and Katara talking to one another before Zuko portrays Iroh.
I have to admit, Prince Zuko, I really find you attractive.
The Ember Island players have deliberately misinterpreted Katara into a manipulative witch, using her emotions as a means of getting with the bad boys and having them do what she wants. A real if she breathes she's a thought type. To everybody except Aang, ironically. It also serves as a means of explaining to a Fire Nation audience who has no idea what actually happened why Prince Zuko could possibly betray his nation. Because a really pretty foreign woman used her feminine wiles to sway his mind and cloud his judgment before Azula could help him come to his senses. I briefly covered Sokka earlier, and there's really not much else that could be said about him. Just that, again, they turned him into a jokester obsessed with food and removed anything resembling a warrior's instincts or a warrior's intellect. Showing that while the Water Tribe's women are emotionally manipulative wenches who will cause trouble for the sake of their own feelings, the Water Tribe's men are utter buffoons who can't keep their minds off their next meal. Now compared to the rest of the gang, Toph doesn't get much screen time in the play. But through this one little introduction, it tells you everything you need to know about how they view Toph and the Earth Kingdom as a whole. Toph in the play is portrayed as a 6-foot-tall jacked brute whose seismic sense relies on screaming rather than feeling the earth beneath her. And at first it can just come across as a lack of real information on her based on the sources that the Ember Island players had to work with, as well as a statement on their general incompetency. But remember the mission statement here. This play isn't just a portrayal of Aang's journey, it's Fire Nation propaganda. And given everything that we've discussed already about Aang and the feminization of his character, do you really think they'd want to accurately portray the idea that a blind little girl could possibly be the one to teach the Avatar earthbending? Instead, they went the complete opposite route, figuring that the greatest earthbender in the world and the one who can teach the Avatar must be a big strong man. It also serves to make the Fire Nation look less weak, because in all the stories that could be told about Toph facing the Fire Nation, the very idea that this little blind girl could outbend some of the nation's greatest soldiers would make them look like little bitches. Thus, portraying her as bigger, stronger, and more mannish than she really is softens the blow to their losses. Something that they don't do with Aang purely because, again, he's the subject of mockery and at least has the excuse of being more than a normal person, being the Avatar and all that. Not to mention that while they want to acknowledge Aang as a threat, they also want to humiliate him for being the free-thinking, free spirit that he is, so they're going to butcher him as much as they can. Meanwhile with Toph, there's a lot of insecurity going on in the Fire Nation, so they need to make her look more threatening than she really is to justify it. Also, if we look at the way they portray King Bumi, who is also jacked beyond belief in the play, it also serves as a pretty clear indicator that the Fire Nation sees the Earth Kingdom as a bunch of kooky muscle-bound brutes with rocks for brains. The only exception to this would be the soldiers of Ba Sing Se, which by this point in the series was basically an extension of the Fire Nation, and thus its soldiers would be the only ones the Ember Island players could have a clear frame of reference in accurately portraying. Zuko and Iroh's portrayals are an interesting case. Let's go over the easy to cover of the two first with Uncle Iroh. Now, Iroh was regarded as a legend within the Fire Nation for many years, being one of the greatest firebenders to come from the nation, second only to Ozai himself, and a war hero who attempted to overthrow the city of Ba Sing Se. However, after betraying his nation and attempting to teach his nephew about the sanctity of life and harmony between nations, any respect that a Fire Nation citizen or soldier may have had for him was long gone.
You used to be the pride of the Fire Nation, our top general, the Dragon of the West. Now look at you.
All they saw now was a kooky old man who, along with Katara, helped tempt Zuko into treachery.
Choose treachery. It's more fun.
And that's exactly how the Ember Island players portray him, as more concerned with self-pleasure via cake and massages, and betraying his nation for shits and giggles, rather than putting his nation before himself, like a good soldier should.
Let's forget about the Avatar and get massages.
As for Zuko, well, they got him wrong in a number of ways. For one, they got the scar on the wrong side. Again, this could merely be seen as another case of Ember Island incompetence. But let's really think about this for a second. Zuko is the Fire Nation prince. Damn near every member of the Fire Nation royal family and the military knows the story behind the scar. And damn near every Fire Nation citizen knows the story. There were a large number of key witnesses to the Agni Kai that saw Zuko gain his scar. They even got the scar wrong on the poster, which is astounding considering we've seen posters of Zuko throughout the show that have the scar on the right side. So are the Ember Island players really that stupid that they don't know what side the Scar is on for one of the Fire Nation's biggest traitors? Or, given that this entire play is meant to be a farce towards our protagonist, is this just another way to humiliate Zuko, deliberately misrepresenting his appearance by getting it just close enough, but getting a crucial detail wrong? I don't know, this is admittedly a bit of a stretch on my part. Not really a case of Fire Nation propaganda per se, more a case of the Fire Nation being petty for no reason. Thankfully, there's a lot more meat to the rest of this, since, just like Katara's obsession with hope, the Ember Island players flanderized Zuko by having him obsess over honor.
I don't have time to stuff my face. I must capture the Avatar to regain my honor!
To the point that, in a deliberate misrepresentation of a scene where the gang has Azula cornered, rather than her being able to escape by distracting everybody by blasting Iroh, they have Azula escape by distracting Zuko with shouting about his honor. It gets to the point that those are his final words before Azula kills him in the play. It makes a mockery out of the journey he underwent to redeem himself after being punished by his father. Like they're trying to say, shut up already about your honor. You were humiliated, get over yourself, you're a disgrace to your nation. And you can tell this is how the general public feels about him based on how loudly they cheered at the prospect of Azula murdering her brother in cold blood. And as I said before, they make him out to be more weak-minded, with the implication that part of the reason Zuko betrayed his nation was because he was wooed by a pretty girl from the Water Tribe. Either that, or based on how easily they make it seem like Zuko flip-flops between his allegiances, having Azula easily convince him to turn on his uncle, only for him to join the gang to seize the throne a few scenes later, they just make him look incredibly indecisive. Either explanation serves to make Zuko look like more of an enemy of the state, and vilify him easier for a public brainwashed by the royal family. Now that we've gone through all the major characters, before we finish up, let's run through the portrayals of a few minor characters in order to wrap things up. Before, I said that the Fire Nation had absolutely no respect for Admiral Zhao, given his incompetency in catching Aang. You can tell that because he's been reduced to a doll the actress hangs onto when she wears the costume for Aang's fusion with the Ocean Spirit. The Blue Spirit is rendered as a dude with a couple of swords and a goofy mask with a goofy voice. Not much to say here outside of the fact that the Blue Spirit never talked because, well, he was Zuko, but the Fire Nation doesn't know that. I'm sure if they did, they'd use this to rub it into the traitor aspect even more. King Bumi is reduced to a muscle-bound kook who speaks in riddles as a way of making the Earth Kingdom look that much more foolish, as is the way the Earth King of Ba Sing Se is for how briefly we see him, being given big dorky glasses and clutching onto his bear for safety. Given Jet is basically a terrorist in the eyes of the Fire Nation, their portrayal is less than favorable, ignoring any brainwashing done by the Dai Li in Ba Sing Se in favor of just making him a quack to laugh at. In addition to making it seem like Jet flooded the Fire Nation's stronghold because Katara coaxed him into it, it serves as a means of showing how weak-minded other enemies of the state are. And of course, the two most favorably shown characters in the play are Azula and Fire Lord Ozai, being made out to be powerful, competent, and level-headed in the face of their enemies. I will say that I find it interesting that they had Azula murder Zuko so easily. Whether it's because they were aware of how unhinged Azula is, who probably could have murdered Zuko without batting an eye even if he didn't betray the Fire Nation, or their portrayal of Zuko being the enemy that he is allowed for them to show him being killed without thinking too much about it. I don't know, I'm gonna let y'all decide that in the comments. Now I know what some of you may be thinking. I'm probably overthinking like half of this, maybe even more than half. Zuko established at the beginning of the episode that the Ember Island players are a bunch of hacks who can't produce good theater.
Ugh. My mother used to take us to see them. They butchered love amongst the dragons every year.
Surely that would be the excuse for everything they got wrong, right? And while that may be an excuse for the crappy dialogue and the over-the-top performances, I'm not sure if that's an excuse for the writing. Remember, the Ember Island players sourced everything they portrayed in the play, and there was a lot of stuff that they found out about.
His sources include singing nomads, pirates, prisoners of war, and a surprisingly knowledgeable merchant of cabbage.
Stuff that other people shouldn't have even been around to see if we were being perfectly honest. Like Aang's trials against Bumi or Jet going crazy. If they were able to get details on these events at all, then surely they would have had enough information to portray these events accurately if they wanted to. But they didn't, because on top of this being a theatrical performance, with Sozin's comet coming in a matter of days, it was a means of instilling Fire Nation pride ahead of a big war. Portraying these events as they happened would have been counterintuitive to the cause. That's why, outside of things they couldn't ignore, like Aang's defense against the Fire Nation Navy in the Northern Water Tribe, or the failure to drill through Ba Sing Se, which by the way the audience is shown bored with because a group of indoctrinated citizens can't stand to see their precious Fire Nation princess lose to the likes of the Avatar, they embellished or changed as much as they could in order to make sure things fit said cause. The cause being glory to the Fire Nation and the great Fire Lord Ozai. And as you can see based on the audience's reactions to Ozai killing Aang, it worked like a charm. I am Melon Lord, but you can call me Crit.